Hi, I'm Dan Francis, co-owner and industrial designer here at MSB Technology. And today we'll be doing a connections and quick start guide for the Sentinel DAC setup. I have here on the rack a Sentinel DAC with the jack panels facing obviously the wrong way, but that's going to help show you what the connections will look like and how to set up your own Sentinel DAC at home. All right, we have in front of us here the Sentinel digital director on the top shelf. In the center here, we have the analog converter. And in the very bottom, we have the power supply. Now the power supply feeds power to the analog converter. Then the analog converter is connected to the digital director by fiber links. The fiber can be any length required. This allows you to separate the analog converter from the digital director with long distances. That being said, the connection between the analog converter and the power base is fixed based on the DC interconnect cables included with the Sentinel DAC. The stock shipping length of the Sentinel DAC umbilical cables is 32 inches. This allows for a vertical shelf-to-shelf stack height of a maximum of 24 inches. But the 32-inch cable does require the units to be in a vertical orientation. If you plan on having the units side by side on separate racks, you will need at least the 48-inch cable. And if you plan to have the analog converter and power supply separated across 3 racks, with the digital director in the center for a symmetrical setup, you will need the 72-inch umbilical cables. On the Sentinel DAC support page on our website, you will find cable lengths and the distances between shelves or between racks for optimal setups. When starting to set up a Sentinel DAC or any piece of MSB equipment, please do not start with the AC cables. The AC cables should be installed last. So first up will be the DC umbilical cables. We will have 3 umbilical cables between the power supply and the analog converter. There is one power supply for one mono DAC, a second power supply for the other mono DAC, and then a third power supply dedicated for the clock in the analog converter. In the accessory box, you'll find the 3 power supply cables across the top. Each mono DAC cable will be on the left and right side, with the central clock power cable in the middle. This is indicated by these red markers. When installing heavy-duty umbilical cables, I want to point out a couple notes. It is always better to twist the cable itself and not the connector. This will reduce the strain on the connector and ensure a longer life. So starting with the clock power, we will line it up and firmly press it in until you hear an audible click. Now, going from clock power on the power supply to clock power on the analog converter, you'll notice we're not aligned on the connection, but instead of grabbing the connector, I'm going to just simply twist the cable until it lines up and then insert. Now, let's do a DAC power supply. These cables are even heavier duty, so they're even more difficult to insert. Starting with the power supply, insert until there's an audible click. We'll start from the mono DAC power supply and then connect here to the left mono DAC power. These connections are made in the center, not in the mono DAC output. This is a separate connection called the confluence, and we'll talk about that later. So here again, to line up the connector, we're going to twist the cable. Now, here is the last mono power cable. So we'll start at the power supply again, on the mono DAC power supply, and then again, bring up the cable to the center, twisting the cable itself, not the connector. After the DC umbilical cables are installed, we'll now install the Sentinel Link fiber cables. Go ahead and collect 2 of the included fiber cables. On the back of the Sentinel digital director, there will be a right and left output. These will provide the signals for these fiber cables. Remove the dust covers from the transceivers, and then on the end of the cable, you will need to remove the white dust covers. Now insert both cables into the Sentinel digital director. There will be an audible click on insertion. Now trace each cable to the other end, ensuring that left goes to left and right goes to right. On the other end of the cable, you will need to remove the dust caps, remove the dust cover from the mono DAC input, and insert. Removing the dust covers on the other end of the right connector, the dust cover from the right mono DAC, we will insert the other link. We now have the digital connections between the digital director and the analog converter. For long-term installations, you may want to use an AOC fiber cable. These have an integrated cable into the transmitter. If you plan on using AOC cables, let's go over how to install them as the Sentinel link to each mono DAC. So to start, you want to remove the existing transmitters from both the digital director and each mono DAC. The easiest way to do that is to remove the dust cover and then pull the blue lever. You've now removed both transmitters from the digital director. The new AOC cable will plug directly into the chassis. Now we'll do the same for the other end, removing both the dust covers and then the existing transmitters by pulling the blue lever out and removing. If you reinstall these transmitters, make sure after it is pushed and clicked back into place, the blue lever is returned to the original upwards position. Separate both left and right AOC cables and then insert it into the mono DAC. Now that we've connected the digital director to the analog converter, it's time to add the analog outputs. So there are a couple different configurations, so let's talk about those options. By default, output number 1 on both the right and left sides of the unit will be active. This is a balanced analog output and will work for most systems. We have the option to switch between output number 1 and output number 2, depending on what you're trying to achieve. This will also allow you to drive 2 different systems and pick between them in the menu. The third configuration would be a biamp mode. This puts half of the DACs from each mono DAC to one connector. So instead of 16 per channel, you'd have 8 DACs to the output number 1 and 8 DACs to output number 2. Now, if you have the Sentinel amplifiers, they will come with a special connection called the confluence. You'll see that connection here in the center of the mono DAC. The Sentinel will automatically detect if a confluence amplifier is connected through this connection. There is no setup required if you're using this connection. Simply insert the confluence cable between the amplifier and analog converter. So we'll now add the analog outputs. The connections between the units are now made. At this point, you can add any of your digital input connections, like network or Pro USB, and then it's time to power on the unit. So we can now connect the IEC cables to both the director and the power base. Next to the IEC input on the digital director, you will see a power switch. If the unit is not turning on, please check this. A few last setup connections to mention. On the digital director, there is an RS-232 input. You can find the RS-232 commands on the Sentinel DAC support page. On the jack panel of the power supply, there is a grounding lug. This can be used if you're using a specific grounding scheme. More information for that can also be found on the Sentinel DAC support page. The Sentinel analog converter is equipped with analog inputs. we have 2 sets of XLR balanced inputs, and then 2 sets of RCA single-ended inputs. You can see them both on the right and left sides of the DAC. Please read the labels on the jack panel to know which are a set across the 2 units. For example, if you're using the XLR2 input, it's going to be here and here as a matched set across both mono DACs. Let me interject a quick note on power consumption and heat with the Sentinel DAC. This product is unlike any DAC you've ever seen before. It has quite a bit of power consumption, more along the lines of an amplifier. It is important to have proper ventilation or have the unit in an air-conditioned environment for best performance. The overall power consumption of the Sentinel DAC is around 250 watts. You cannot install this in a closed cabinet with no ventilation. The units will overheat. We recommend installing them on an open rack like this, where there's plenty of airflow between the units. If you have limited airflow, we recommend leaving a breathing area around the unit and including forced ventilation to the cabinet. This will cycle the air through and make sure the units do not overheat. Now that we have the Sentinel DAC on the rack with all the appropriate cable connections made, I want to go over the first power up of the unit. To turn on the analog converter, we're going to use the power button on the front of the power base here. You can see the illuminated red MSB indicating that the power is off. There are a couple controls to the power base to control the behavior of power-ons and also the LED brightness, and a startup delay if you have multiple pieces of equipment like amplifiers and the DAC starting up at the same time. If you look in the user guide, we have a diagram under Power Base User Interface. This highlights the 3 controls under the front edge of the power base. Using this, we can reach under the front and adjust the settings as needed. So, first things first. The LED brightness is controlled by a wheel directly under the MSB logo. You can simply rotate the wheel to change the brightness. If you make the brightness very dim, it'll still illuminate at full brightness when the state has changed, as if it was turned off or on, just to help indicate in a bright room what the condition of the power base is. Now reaching under and going slightly to the left side of the unit, we have a toggle switch with 3 modes. If the switch is switched all the way to the outside edge, like towards the heatsink, that is the normal mode of operation. This allows the power to be controlled by the remote or by the front power button. Now, if you put that toggle switch to the center, this is a mode that disables the power control from the remote, but still allows the unit to function based on the power button. Now, if you take that toggle switch and move it to the center, this will slave the Sentinel DAC to another unit. So if you have a 12-volt trigger connected to your amplifiers, you can have the amplifier as the master and the Sentinel DAC as the slave. For this, we'll start in the normal position, flipping the toggle switch all the way to the outside edge. Now, on the far right, we have a delay switch. This will delay the power on so that when you have this equipped with other amplifiers, you can have a 1, 2, 3 setup, so that no 2 components are turning on at the same time and having a large inrush current on your circuits. The shortest delay is towards the center of the unit, with the longest delay being towards the outside heatsink of the unit. For this, we'll move the switch all the way towards the center. With that, we're now ready to power on the Sentinel DAC. Now, let's take a look at the digital director setup. Right out of the box, the Sentinel DAC will be ready to play if using the XLR analog output 1. But depending on your setup, you might need to change some of the settings in your digital director. So what I wanted to do is go through the menu and show you the different options available and how they change your system setup. You can access the menu one of 2 ways. On the MSB remote, we have the 3-bar menu button here. This will bring you into the menu, and clicking it again will exit the menu and save the settings. While in the menu, you can use the volume control wheel to go up and down through menu options, and the center button for enter. Or you can use the user interface on the top of the DAC, with the top left button here being the menu, using the volume knob to go through options, and then the circle enter button here on the right. So let's get started. Entering the menu with the menu button, we first see a brightness option. This indicates the brightness of the display. To change this, hit enter, move the knob to change the different brightness. When you've selected one that you're happy with, hit enter again, and you can now move on to the next option. After brightness, we have display mode. Hit the enter button, and you can scroll and see the different options here. We have an always on display, which keeps it at maximum brightness. We have an auto dimming, which brightens when inputs are changed or volume is changed, and then goes to a dimmer state. And then we have auto off, which shows the volume or input information temporarily and then turns the display off for listening. Next up is display information. Entering this menu option, we see we have a detailed option and a volume only option. This can be used to change the amount of information you see on the display, with putting the volume center for the volume only option, or having the input and sample rates available as well. Next up, we have video mode. This is an important setup option if you're integrating this with a TV or something that will have a latency issue. So we recommend putting video mode on any input that is connected to a television. To set this, hit enter, and then select the active input that is connected to a TV source, and then enable video mode for that source. So whenever that is switched to, it'll automatically switch to video mode and reduce latency for low quality inputs. Now here is a very important setting if you don't plan on using the integrated preamp of the Sentinel DAC. The startup volume option, if you hit enter, will show you the default volume at startup. But if you want to disable the preamp for use with an external preamp, simply scroll through the volume until you get to 100, and then next it'll say preamp off. Hit enter, and this is now saved. This will disable the internal preamp of the Sentinel DAC and will have the best performance if used with an external preamp. There will be no volume attenuation or change, and it'll be a direct output from the DAC modules to the external preamp. Then we have input selection modes. Please read your manual for the different types of input selections. The default of smart inputs is what we recommend and all units ship with. Now here's a unique menu setting to the Sentinel DAC. This is called the output mode. This allows you to select a few different analog output modes. Entering the menu, we have output 1. This is the default shipping configuration of the Sentinel DAC. This will put all of the DAC modules in the Sentinel DAC to the analog XLR output 1. So when hooking up your system, by default, please use the XLR 1 analog outputs for your amps. Now with this menu option, you can also choose to move it to output 2. This can be used to switch between two different analog systems. So if you're using headphone amps, you can have it set to output 2 with output 1 for your main amplifiers in your 2-channel system. But only one output will be active at a time when using this method. Now there's a third option here for bi-amping. The unique thing about the bi-amping mode is it's going to split the DAC modules from each mono DAC to one output channel. So for output 1, you'll have 8 DAC modules, and output 2, you'll have another 8, but these will be 2 completely independent DACs for 2 independent amplifiers. When this mode is enabled, both output 1 and output 2 will be active for bi-amp setups. Now there is a fourth mode for the confluence analog outputs, but that will be automatically detected by the Sentinel DAC and activated when the cable and the amplifier are connected. You will not need to worry about setting those up in the menu. The render remote menu option is for selecting whether or not the controls on the remote work with the renderer or if they work with a previous MSB transport. By default, it'll be enabled for the renderer. This option will only appear if a renderer is installed. Now we have the universal I2S input option. You will see here that it says Uni I2S D. So this indicates the module in the slot D on the back of the jack panel. If you have multiples, they will show up one after the other in this menu. It is required to enable this module in the menu with the specific protocols to the source being used. If we hit enter, it'll be off by default, and we can scroll through and see different options, such as the PS audio, antipodes, an I2S-A protocol, hi-fi rows, etc. Please consult the menu to make sure you have the right mode enabled for your source. A full list of compatible sources will be listed on the MSB website. After we get through those menu options, we have the analog input section. All of our analog inputs are disabled by default. You will need to enable them if you plan on using them. The reason for this is, unlike digital, we can't detect if you hooked up an analog source, and we don't want you to have to toggle between the unused analog inputs when you're changing input sources. All of these analog inputs will align with the labels on the jack panel. So when hooking up your analog source, please record if it's the RCA or XLR and the number with it. Here we have analog XLR 1, 2, RCA 1 and 2. Entering the menu, you'll see it's disabled by default. Then we have a on volume option. This will enable the Sentinel preamp to control the volume. Or we have a bypass option. The bypass option can be used for home theaters or things that are externally controlled before or after the DAC. We now have a list of the different digital ports on the back of the unit. They will each list what is connected. So we have the renderer, which will also include the IP address and the firmware version. Universal I2S in port D, as seen before. This is a great way to make sure you have the jack panel organized the way you would like. You will then see the serial number, the build date, the dealer, and the region it was sold in. We then get to the software revision number, hardware revision number, and at the very bottom of the menu, we have a reset option. To reset the settings, hit enter once. This will select confirm, and then hit it one more time. It will then indicate that the reset has been done. When finished with the settings, it's important to exit the menu with the menu button, like so. Exiting the menu will save the settings you've changed. If you power off the unit before exiting the menu, those settings will be lost. Thanks for taking the time to watch this setup video. Now that your Sentinel DAC is properly set up, you can sit back, relax, and enjoy the music.